There are secrets buried so deep. They aren't found in locked diaries or whispered in the shadowed corners of confessionals. They are written in the very code of our existence, twisted into the double helix of our blood. We walk through life believing that our history is set in stone, that the faces looking back at us from mantelpiece photographs are the architects of our identity. But sometimes, all it takes is a plastic vial and 5 milliliters of saliva to turn a family tree into a list of suspects. Arthur Vance believed he was buying a fun Christmas gift, a novelty to pass the time. He didn't know he was buying a grenade. And he certainly didn't know that by the time the dust settled, the silence in his house would be deafening. It began on a Tuesday, the kind of unremarkable, gray afternoon that blends into the wallpaper of memory. The Vance estate sat on the edge of the sleepy town of Oakhaven, a sprawling Victorian structure that smelled of cedar polish and generations of stability. Arthur was 42, a man who wore his family name like a suit of armor. He was a spitting image of his father, William, or so everyone said. They shared the same heavy brow, the same erratic temper, the same way of drumming their fingers on the table when the silence stretched too long. To Arthur, his lineage was his anchor. He wanted to trace it back, to find the kings and warriors he was sure swam in his gene pool. He sat at his mahogany desk, the glow of the laptop monitor, the only light in the darkening study. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the old window panes like a thief trying to find a way in. The house was quiet, too quiet. His wife was upstairs asleep. His father, William, was living in the guest cottage out back, resting his aging bones. It was a kingdom of peace. Arthur took a sip of scotch, the burn settling in his chest, and moved the cursor to the inbox notification. Your results are ready. His heart gave a little flutter of anticipation, a childish excitement. He expected to see a map of Western Europe, perhaps a splash of Scandinavian intrigue. He clicked the link. The screen refreshed, the circle of color percentages loading pixel by pixel. He leaned in, squinting. The first thing he felt wasn't horror. It was confusion, a dull, intellectual disconnect. The map was wrong. The regions were wrong. But it was a section labeled close family matches that made the air in the room suddenly feel thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out through the chimney. At the very top, listed as parent, was a name Arthur had never seen before. Not William Vance, not a distant cousin, a stranger, a man named Subject 8940. Arthur laughed, a short, dry sound that died instantly in the empty room. It was a glitch. It had to be. He scrolled down, his finger trembling just slightly on the mouse wheel. He was looking for the mistake, the error in the algorithm, but the data was relentless. It wasn't just that his father wasn't on the list. It was the other matches, half-siblings, 3 of them, spread across the state, all born within the same 2-year window. The scotch in his stomach turned to acid. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but Arthur was suddenly freezing. He looked out the window toward the guest cottage where the man he called Dad was sleeping, the man who raised him, the man with the heavy brow. Arthur didn't know it yet, but the man in that cottage wasn't just a liar. He was a ghost, and the screen glowing in front of Arthur wasn't offering answers. It was offering a motive. The front door downstairs creaked open, just a fraction, but in the silence of the revelation, it sounded like a gunshot. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Arthur ignored the creaking floorboards in the hallway. His attention welded to the screen. His fingers, now slick with cold sweat, flew across the keyboard. He didn't search for a family tree this time. He typed in the sterile, dehumanizing label that had replaced his father's name, Subject 8940. The internet connection seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the storm outside, slow and agonizing. When the results finally loaded, they didn't lead to a genealogy forum or a distant relative's Facebook page. They led to the state archive, a digitized prison database from 20 years ago. Inmate 8,940. Status: deceased. Execution by lethal injection. Arthur stared at the mugshot. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror. The eyes were his. The jawline was his. But the man in the photo wore a jumpsuit, and his face was twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated malice. The name under the photo wasn't William Vance. It was Elias Vance, William's twin brother, the black sheep erased from family history, the man the newspapers had called the Oakhaven Butcher. The room began to spin. The air grew thick, tasting of copper and bile. Arthur wasn't the son of a noble patriarch sleeping in the cottage. He was the spawn of a monster who had hunted families for sport. The nausea hit him hard, forcing him to grip the edge of the mahogany desk until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't breathing. He was gasping, drowning in the dry air of the study. He needed to see him. He needed to look William in the eye. Arthur burst out the back door, plunging into the freezing rain. The wind howled, tearing at his clothes, but he couldn't feel the cold. He could only feel the rage burning through his veins, a sudden, sharp violence that felt terrifyingly familiar. He kicked open the door to the guest cottage. William was sitting in his leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. The fire in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows that made the old man look frail, almost translucent. "You knew," Arthur hissed, his voice unrecognizable, a guttural growl. "You knew I would find out eventually." William took a slow sip, the ice clinking against the glass, a delicate sound in the chaotic night. He finally looked up. His eyes were sad, tired, and filled with a pity that cut deeper than any knife. "I didn't steal you, Arthur," William said softly. "I saved you. Elias. He wanted to teach you his trade. He wanted a legacy. I am not him." Arthur screamed, stepping forward, his hands balling into fists. The violence in his chest was surging, a tidal wave demanding release. He wanted to hurt the old man. He wanted to break something. "Aren't you?" William whispered. He reached into the side pocket of his chair and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. He tossed it onto the rug at Arthur's muddy feet. "I raised you with love. I gave you structure. I tried to drown out the blood with ink and money. But I've seen the way you look at things when you think no one is watching. I've seen the temper." Arthur stared at the notebook. It was his, the one he kept hidden under his mattress as a teenager, the one filled with drawings of dead birds, drawings of fires, things he had promised himself he would never show a living soul. William leaned forward, the firelight catching the tears in his eyes. Nature versus nurture, Arthur. It was the only gamble I ever lost. Arthur backed away, his heel catching on the doorframe. The DNA test hadn't just revealed a stranger. It had held up a mirror to the darkness Arthur had spent 40 years suppressing. He looked at his hands, trembling in the dim light, and for the first time, he didn't see his own fingers. He saw the hands of the butcher. He turned and ran back into the night, the rain washing over him. But it couldn't wash away the truth. He wasn't afraid of what he had found in the database. As he stood alone in the dark, listening to the thunder roll like a judge's gavel, Arthur realized the true horror wasn't who his father was. It was realizing why the silence of the house had always felt so comfortable.